You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson is here with us today. We're just over 6 months into her tenure, which means the honeymoon period is in the rearview mirror. Voters have gotten a look at how her administration is handling some of the biggest issues facing the city. I'll be asking her about many of those issues today, including how ready is Seattle to host its first World Cup games starting Monday? What happened to those 500 shelter beds that were supposed to be added before the games? How's the mayor taking criticism from the business community over some of her progressive messaging? And how will Wilson, as a former transit rider organizer, prioritize moving people throughout the city? The mayor joins me now on Soundside to talk about all of this. Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson, thanks for being back on Soundside.
Of course. Great to be here.
So I want to start with the World Cup. I mean, the city has been preparing for these 6 matches. The first one is Belgium versus Egypt on Monday. We're going to talk about a lot of serious stuff today, but kind of on a lighter note, I mean, you announced that Seattle's partnering with the World Cup Organizing Committee to get 1,400 tickets into the hands of local kids and their caregivers. There's a lot of excitement as this big event is right on our doorstep. You have kind of indicated in the past that this sort of big city showcase was a new thing for you. It wasn't necessarily part of your wheelhouse before. How do you feel today? How's it been like prepping for such a huge global event?
Well, I will say I am very excited for the World Cup being in Seattle. I mean, of all the, I think it's well known that I was not like a huge professional sports person before stepping into office. Now, of course, I love all of our teams, but I will say that the World Cup is one professional sporting event that I, have in my past life sought out. I love soccer, used to play soccer, so really, really excited that this is happening in our city. And of course, we are all hoping that the games, first of all, go off without a hitch. But also that this is a real benefit to our city, both in terms of economic benefit and just being able to really show off our city. We're going to have so many visitors from around the world and around the region. We want people to come, have a great time, and to leave wanting to come back, right? And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about the fact that, as you said, 1,400 youth and their caregivers are going to be able to attend these games for free. And even if you're not going to the stadium, we have free watch parties all around the city, and just really excited for the energy that that's going to create.
So there's been this long-running debate about the city surveillance cameras, and you made a call on Friday that you were going to turn on the cameras that are around the stadium district. Now, those were part of the group of cameras that you had allowed to be installed, but again, they were turned off in the absence of a credible threat. I'm just curious, what did you see or what did you hear from law enforcement that made you decide that this was the time to turn those cameras on? Can you give us a sense of why you made that call?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, basically, a week ago or so, I got a briefing from SPD and other law enforcement partners where they outlined a couple of credible threats that had come in. And, basically that means someone with the intent to harm, people or property, in the context of a big event like this, where we also believe that that person potentially has the means to carry out that threat. And it is unsurprising that at an event of this magnitude, with this much attention on it, that our law enforcement agencies would be gathering information about credible threats, but basically the information they shared convinced me that it was warranted to turn on those cameras in the stadium district. And I'll just say this is entirely consonant with the approach that I outlined earlier this year to our CCTV surveillance system. I'm still waiting for the news headline that says, Mayor Wilson does exactly what she said she would do, as opposed to, reverse course or caved or whatever. But yeah, it seemed to me a warranted decision, and we will be turning those cameras off after the game so that we have time to complete our data security audit and the other evaluations that are underway so that we can have that public conversation and make a more holistic decision about the future of our surveillance in Seattle.
So we are waiting for that information, for the audits on privacy, the audits on effectiveness. What will your thought process be like when you are taking in that information and making a decision on the bigger question about the future of these cameras, whether they expand in our city or not?
Yeah, and I will also say that this is not just my decision, right? Like this is going to be a decision that's made also in consultation with our city council, and with numerous stakeholders in the public. So I anticipate there being a public conversation around this that will shape that decision. But we really need the information, right? I mean, the Real-Time Crime Center and our CCTV cameras were conceived of as a pilot, and part of this evaluation was kind of baked into the plan from the beginning. And then this decision to expand the pilot kind of was made before that evaluation had been completed. So we really want to do that work to understand how the cameras are being used, how effective they are, and then all of the questions around civil rights, civil liberties, privacy, and potential misuse of that data. So all those things have to be weighed. I think it's a really challenging issue in part because we're talking about real benefits and costs and also about risks, right? And I think from what I have seen and heard, I think it's clear that cameras have a real utility in, especially in helping to solve crimes. And at the same time, there are risks with misuse of that data and also just, concerns about privacy, right? The fact that, for example, that camera footage can be through a public disclosure request given to, anyone in the public. There's a lot of considerations which are just genuinely difficult to weigh. And I think that's part of why we need that bigger public conversation as well as more information than we have yet.
Is it fair to say then that the privacy audit is really the one that you're most waiting for? Because it sounds like you have been convinced by what you've seen already in terms of effectiveness, but you're just really waiting for more information about potential risks.
I don't think that's the complete picture. I think the potential risks are really important, especially in the context of federal immigration enforcement and the heightened anxiety around our federal government and the ways that it might be trying to use information. But I will say that even if we establish that these cameras have a utility in solving crime, that still has to be weighed against people's just kind of privacy concerns, which isn't necessarily the same thing as data security, and also just cost and right, just what is the place of these cameras in our larger public safety strategies, and I really think it's important not to overstate the role. Right, when we talk about public safety, there's so much that we are talking about, and in the end, I think that these cameras are a very, very tiny part of that, and so I know a lot of public attention and debate has been focused on them, but when we think about what makes people safe and what makes people feel safe in our city, there is so much more, right? Everything from prevention and our, crisis responders and even traffic safety, right? Which in a recent annual public safety survey actually was people's top public safety concern, right? Above any of the normal things that you think of as public safety, right? Traffic safety is really high up there. So my administration is working really hard right now to develop kind of our overarching strategies around public safety, and the surveillance is a very small component of that.
Let's talk about the shelter situation. Obviously, earlier in the term, you had promised 500 new shelter beds open by the World Cup. It was always going to be a stretch goal. You called it an aggressive timeline initially. So far, the Inner Bay Pallet Shelter is the only new shelter that's going to be coming online before the World Cup. There's 75 units in that pallet shelter facility. More units are expected later this summer in West Seattle and South Park. Was it a mistake to set such an aggressive goal? Where are we at right now?
Yeah, as you might imagine, this is a question I'm getting asked a lot. Um, I don't feel that it was a mistake. The reason why during the campaign last year I talked about 4,000 units over 4 years, and then we translated that into 1,000 units in my first year and 500 in the first half of the year. It was really a desire to talk about the scale of the need, right? And that number. I mean, big numbers are big numbers, right? But where that number came from was understanding that we have over 4,000 people sleeping unsheltered on the streets of Seattle. And given that, for example, in the last 4 years before I entered office, Seattle produced a net addition of 13 units of shelter, I felt there was a real need to recenter the conversation on the scale of the problem and what it was going to take to actually address that in a really meaningful way, even if that was a huge number that was going to be really hard to achieve. So I don't think that that's a mistake to reframe the conversation in that way. And I think the utility of doing that and what I've seen over the last 5 months is that that really lit a fire under both within internally in the city, all the city departments that we have been working with to accelerate our shelter delivery, and then externally with our partners, right? Both service providers and also philanthropic partners. And so what I've seen is really a remarkable coming together of all of these stakeholders and actors in a way that has meant that we are getting shelter set up way faster than this normally happens. And the pallet shelter that you mentioned in Interbay that we officially opened this past weekend, that happened just so much faster than a project like that normally comes online. And as you mentioned, we have a number of other shelter sites that are going to be opening up in the next few months. So even though we're not meeting that 500 in the first half of the year, we are going to be adding hundreds of new shelter units this year. And also, I think this is the other part that I'm really proud of, is being really intentional about making sure that this is not just a roof over someone's head, right? We know that people coming out of chronic homelessness who might be struggling with drug addiction, mental illness, often need a lot of support, supportive services in order to be successful in a shelter environment. And so we're being very intentional about pairing this shelter with supportive services in the right way, being very intentional about public safety plans and making sure that these shelters are going to be successful in the neighborhoods that they're located in. And that's really learning from so much experience over the last 10 years of how we have tried to do shelter in this city. So so I guess, yeah, I don't think it's a mistake, obviously, the way that then people, frame it as like, oh, you failed to meet the goal or whatever. But I think we need to keep talking about those big numbers, because ultimately the test of the success of what we're doing here is, are there dramatically fewer people sleeping unsheltered on our streets, right? And so I'm happy to keep being vocal about the fact that we are failing until we start to succeed.
And what's the biggest hurdle that you've run into? Is it siting? Is it getting the land that is required? I know you've pushed through some changes when it comes to that through the city council. What's the biggest hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, citing opening a new shelter is a complex thing, right? There's siting, there's all the kind of lease negotiations, contracting with service providers, site readiness, kind of site development. So there's just a lot of moving pieces, and it requires, multiple city departments, like hook up the utilities, all this stuff. So there's just a lot of moving pieces. That's really what it is. I mean, we looked at over 80 sites, 80 potential sites, and basically assessed them along kind of multiple dimensions for feasibility and readiness, and narrowed that down to, I think, 20 some kind of higher priority sites. So we're going to continue doing this work over the next 4 years. But yeah, it's really just a complicated process, and we're moving as fast as we can. Money is another problem.
Money, of
obviously.
course. Yeah,
And
always.
also, coming into office, right? This year's budget was already baked before I entered office, right? It was decided on last year. So just that process of combing through the budget and finding little pockets of money that we could pull into this effort. And of course, some of that required collaboration from the city council to free up some funds, and really grateful for their work doing that. And on the other pieces of legislation that were necessary to basically expand our kind of lease signing ability and potentially expand the size of some of these sites.
KCRHA has been under fire. The damning fiscal audit is something we've talked about on this show. There was financial malpractice outlined there, including losing track of $8 million. The city and county now plan to put this independent financial analyst within KCRHA. You announced that yesterday, I believe, or earlier this week. So how did you and County Executive Zahalai kind of come to that decision? And do you think that will be enough to turn things around with KCRHA?
Yeah, I mean, this is really an immediate step that we felt was necessary to make sure that we have the appropriate financial controls within the agency in the very short term, kind of regardless of the decisions that are made as we go along about the future of the agency. So this is really just making sure that that we are stewarding public dollars appropriately, and that we're able to build that just public confidence, which is lacking right now for very good reason, and the confidence of our respective governments that the KCRHA is able to steward those public funds responsibly in the short term. So there's going to be a bigger conversation moving forward about the future of the KCRHA, and it's complicated. I think for me, there's and I will note that, right, we're doing our shelter acceleration work in-house at the city. We did not do that through the KCRHA, but it's really important to me that we are as we make these big decisions, we are ensuring continuity of service provision, right? So, I mean, the KCRHA holds all these contracts. We really don't want a situation where service providers are suddenly not sure where their money is coming from to keep delivering the services that they're providing. So, and making sure that we have that stability also for the workforce. So, we're trying to move both intentionally and urgently to make these decisions at the same time as we make sure that there is that stability and continuity. And that's just a difficult balancing act. But there's going to be a lot of stakeholders involved as we kind of figure out what that future holds.
And how will you make that call on whether the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is worth saving? Because there are people calling for its dissolution right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another thing that makes this complicated is that this isn't just a question of where the city and the county put their funding, right? We have continuum of care funds, which come from the federal government, which the KCRHA, is the entity that manages those funds. And it's not a simple thing to move all of those functions away from that regional entity. And with the degree of federal uncertainty that we have right now over those funds and other things, right? There's a real risk to instability. So there's just, I'm not going to give you a super clear answer except to say that there are a lot of competing kind of desires right now that we're trying to balance. And I think, the way forward will become a lot clearer over the next couple of months.
You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. I'm speaking with Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson. Kind of a broad overview. We're doing a potluck here of a lot of different topics, including homelessness, the World Cup, and now I want to move to transit. Last week, Mayor, you announced that your office wants to double the current sales tax in the city to fund transit services. It would go from 15 cents per $100 to 30 cents. You campaigned on affordability, obviously, and a sales tax is a regressive tax. Why is this the way to fund transit services in Seattle?
Yeah, great question. And I'll say I am very excited about this renewal and expansion measure. We are in a moment where a lot of transit agencies around the country, including big city transit agencies, are severely cutting or proposing severe cuts to their transit service. And this is at a time when gas prices are through the roof, right? This is exactly the time when we should be investing in public transit, making sure that people have those options. And to me, I'll talk about the sales tax in a minute, but this really is an affordability measure, right? Because this is what gives people the option to drive less or potentially not even own a car, which is, as we know, a huge household expense, right? $12,000+ a year is kind of a standard for what car ownership costs. And so this is really about giving people transportation options and making Seattle a city where you don't have to drive everywhere every day. And I also like to emphasize that often people think about public transit as a benefit for transit riders, which of course it is. But this is really for everyone, right? Because as people continue moving to our city, you really do not want all of those people trying to own cars and drive and park, right? Even if you are someone who needs to drive or wants to drive, it is really to all of our benefit to have a world-class public transit system that can move a lot of people without additional cars on the road. So this is about people's time too. I mean, this is about increasing the frequency and reliability on many bus routes so that you can get home faster after a long day at work and spend time with your kids, right? So there are so many good things about expanding public transit, especially as we're continuing to build out our regional light rail system. Making sure we have those investments in bus service is really, really important. Now, sales tax. I am no lover of regressive taxes, right? I've spent my career fighting for progressive taxation. I'm proud of the work that I've done on that score. And we have really limited options when it comes to how we fund transit. Our Transportation Benefit District Authority, sales tax is really the big authority that we have to fund this. And I will say that the increase, in terms of what it will cost an average household, I should have that number on the tip of my tongue, but it's something like, $15 to $20 or something like that a year, right?
Yeah, the last time I checked, it was like for households of $120,000 income a year, it's something in the order of $50 to $60 a year. But it's
for the whole thing, not the expansion.
Yes,
so the
exactly.
The expansion is like $20 some a year or something. So, that's not nothing, but it's also, especially when you think of the scale of, for example, property tax increases that we've been doing recently for levies, right? This is actually a pretty darn modest tax increase, and so I think the bang for your buck here calculator in terms of the 100,000 additional bus trips that we're going to be able to fund with this measure, it's a really clear calculus for me. So I don't like the fact that we're proposing a sales tax increase, and I think this is absolutely the right thing to do, to be investing in our transit system. And also, public transit in Seattle is wildly popular, right? In 2020, which was the last year that we renewed this measure, depths of the pandemic, when most people weren't even riding transit, this measure passed by like over 80%, which is just remarkable. So I'm putting this forward, both thinking that it is a really good idea, a really good investment, and a boon to affordability in our city, and confident that this is something that Seattle voters are going to enthusiastically support.
Another way that transit can be funded is through fares. And King County Metro right now covers less than 10% of its operating costs from fares. The agency used to have about 30% of its operating budget covered by fares. Metro has switched to an educational approach instead of a punitive approach when it comes to fare evasion. Sound Transit is moving towards the possibility of installing fare gates at a lot of its stations. Do you support King County Metro moving towards more fare enforcement on buses to help fund more services?
Yeah, and actually, before I answer this question, I just want to say one more thing about the Seattle Transit measure, because the other thing that this will fund, in addition to bus service, is free annual passes for 22,000 low-income residents of Seattle Housing Authority buildings and housing voucher holders.
We should absolutely be expecting the mayor to, considering your background, you're going to have a lot to say about transit. So please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just think on the affordability theme too, it's just really important to mention that this measure includes a huge expansion of households who are going to be able to get this unlimited annual pass to ride transit. So I think it's really exciting. Going from 10,000 households to 22,000 households is amazing. And just, I know from personal experience, I think a lot of people know, just that sense of freedom that you get when you're someone who depends on transit and you have a unlimited pass that allows you to just go wherever you want. You're not thinking about how you're going to pay for your next ride. So I think that's exciting. So fare enforcement. So yeah, Sound Transit, right? I'm on the Sound Transit board. We are looking at doing a fare gate pilot. I'm kind of undecided on this. I think there are some really good reasons to be considering this. I also am concerned about the impacts. For example, right now, youth ride free across Washington state and in our region, which is amazing. And a lot of youth riding free have not actually gotten that youth Orca card. And I know from talking to a lot of families that they feel there's a lot of hurdles to jump over, a lot of red tape to kind of get that youth Orca card. So these youth are just riding the train, riding the bus, and that gives them a lot of freedom, and their families a lot of freedom that they're able to ride transit. So putting up fare gates and really requiring that tapping your card, that is going to create some barriers for families who are going to need to jump through those hoops to get that youth Orca pass. And I just, I do worry about the very low income folks who are riding transit. And it's easy to say like, yeah, everyone should get a pass, but it's not always easy to actually get one. And so I do worry about the mobility impacts for our lowest income riders. And so as we're considering this Fairgate pilot, really going to be pressing the agency to figure out like, what are they doing to make sure that, people who are eligible for a reduced fare pass are actually getting that pass? And how are we not just putting all of that onus on service providers and other entities that might be helping people to sign up for those programs.
There are other potential benefits that were outlined, and I know we're talking Sound Transit here. I mean, originally my question was whether you were open to that or supported that on Metro as well. There are benefits that were outlined at the Sound Transit meeting, including the BART expansion of gates. They reported it led to a 40% drop in crime. So there are certainly drawbacks to fare enforcement. There are also potential benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about it on Metro buses, especially with the budget issues?
Yeah, sure. On Metro buses, my understanding is right now we have kind of fare ambassador role who, do check fares on some buses. I believe that there is a if there's for repeated non-payment, there's like a fine that you can also resolve through non-monetary means if you don't have the money to pay. So, I can certainly see a case for, I think what I would not want to go back to is a really high fine and punitive approach to fare enforcement on buses where people are basically getting involved in the criminal justice system, and being sent to debt collectors because they didn't pay a $3 fare. So that's a direction I don't want to go in. I do take the point, however, that some kind of accountability is necessary in order to achieve a high rate of fare payment.
Really quickly, obviously, Ballard light rail hopefuls, people who were in favor of the expansion to Ballard, are super disappointed today. Councilmember Dan Strauss has said that the expansion to Ballard is not dead, but it's on life support. You were able, as you said, on the board at Sound Transit, you were able to get the Graham Street infill station achieved. As Councilmember Strauss pointed out on this show, Ballard has an incredibly dense potential ridership, like some huge number, tens of thousands of people expected to ride every day once that expansion does reach there. I know you're not solely in charge of these decisions, and you supported, the idea of Ballard, but we didn't get there, at least in the last vote. What do you say to Ballard residents right now who are disappointed? They feel betrayed. Do you agree with Councilmember Strauss that the idea is on life support and not quite dead yet?
It is absolutely not dead. Um, the reports of Ballard Light Rail's death have been greatly exaggerated. And I will say I'm so proud and thrilled that we were able to get Graham Street Station into the plan, into the affordable plan, because that is a promise to that neighborhood that has been broken far too many times. And now that that is in there, I, as a board member, can devote my full attention to making sure that we reach Market Street as fast as humanly possible. Right now, the terminus of that line is Seattle Center in the quote unquote affordable plan. That is not acceptable. There are a million reasons why it is not good to have Seattle Center as the terminus station. So my hope, what is good about the plan that we passed, is that full planning, design, all the way to Market Street is funded. And so we are going to be moving forward full steam ahead on that work. And that is the work that is going to allow us to find those cost savings at the same time as we go back to Olympia to get that 75-year bond authority, and we pursue the many other levers that Sound Transit has outlined for ways that we can both save costs and open up financial capacity. And so my hope, and what I am committed to doing everything I can to make happen, is that by the time we get to the point where you would be able to put a shovel in the ground to get to Market Street, we have solved the financial problems and we have the money to get there. So my goal is no actual delay, right? So even though the decision we made looks like some kind of deferring or delaying, right? I want no actual delay, and that is what I'm going to be fighting for.
One more question before we go, Mayor. There's been a lot of political hay and hay on right-wing media, especially about this perceived animosity between the business community and yourself. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz criticized your stance towards the business community. He wrote, quote, "The mayor's socialist rhetoric vilifies employers even when she continues to rely on them for revenue. She has encouraged residents who disagree with her policies to leave." How would you characterize your relationship with the business community, and do you feel it needs repair?
Well, I don't agree with Howard Schultz. You'll be surprised to hear.
I don't think you're
Yeah.
the only Seattleite that has issues with Howard Schultz, but I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it has been, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but it has been very interesting seeing the kind of media swirl play out around the millionaire tax comment that I made at a Seattle U Forum, and then of course my visit to a Starbucks picket line in December. And what I will say is that the narrative that has been spun out of those two things is very, very disconnected from the actual relationship of me and my administration to the business community in Seattle. And over the past 5 months, I and my team have done a huge amount of work building bridges with the business community. And my attitude, and what I think I've been pretty clear about laying out in talking with folks, is, look, we're not going to agree on everything. There are going to be things that we disagree about, maybe even things we fight about. But for the good of the city. We all love the city, and we need to be able to work together on so many things, right? We have a common interest in so many fronts, from homelessness to public safety to affordability, right? When I talk about affordability, right, I might think of that first and foremost as about, the experience of a family living here. But from an employer's perspective, it is a problem when their workforce cannot afford to live in this city, when people can't afford to raise children here. And so we have so many common challenges and so many things that we need to work on together, including thinking about the economic future of this region, right? We've been riding this tech wave for a couple of decades, and we know there's a lot of uncertainty that's not about Seattle, right? That's about the industry, that's about AI, that's about the layoffs that we're seeing in the tech industry. And we really all need to think together about how we make Seattle a great place to live, a great place to work, a great place to build a business. And that message has, I think, been very well received. And we have a lot of great collaborations going with the business community, including, our shelter acceleration work, right? The site that we're going to be opening up in South Park, Cloverleaf, later this summer, a 90-unit tiny house village, is funded partly by philanthropic dollars raised through Challenge Seattle. That's coming from Starbucks, that's coming from T-Mobile, that's coming from Microsoft, that's coming from John Stanton and Terry Gillespie, right? So, these are we're building these relationships and doing the work. And so it's been really interesting to see how that kind of media narrative that's become, a national, international narrative is just really does not reflect what we are actually doing on the ground.
Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson, I really appreciate your time today and going through, again, a really wide variety of topics with me. Appreciate you, as always, for coming on the show.
Well, great to be here. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or, of course, on your favorite podcast app.